Eric Arthur Blair, better known by his pen name George Orwell, was an English novelist, journalist, and critic whose work explored themes of totalitarianism, social injustice, and the abuse of power. He is best remembered for his groundbreaking dystopian novel 1984, published in 1949, which has become one of the most influential and widely read works of the 20th century. In fact, it is estimated that more than 30 million copies have been sold worldwide, and it continues to resonate with readers today as a cautionary tale about the fragility of freedom and the dangers of unchecked government power. But what many people do not realize is that 1984 was not just a product of Orwell's imagination. It was also deeply rooted in his own experiences and observations of the world around him. In this video, we will explore the historical and mythological context of 1984 and how it reflects Orwell's concerns about the rise of totalitarian regimes and the threat they pose to humanity. We will also examine some mystical interpretations of the novel and its symbols, as well as its relevance for understanding modern applications of control and manipulation in our society today. So let's start by looking at the historical background of 1984. George Orwell was born in 1903 in Motihari, India, where his father was a British colonial official. When he was 2, his family moved back to England, and he grew up in a small village called Henley, near the city of Oxford. From an early age, he was fascinated by language and literature, and he developed a passion for writing. However, he was also deeply affected by the social and political issues of his time, such as poverty, inequality, and the threat of war. These concerns would later shape his literary career and make him one of the most important voices of the 20th century. After attending university, Orwell joined the Indian Imperial Police Force and served in Burma for several years. During his time there, he witnessed firsthand the brutality and corruption of the colonial regime and became disillusioned with the British Empire. He resigned from the police force in 1927 and returned to England, where he began writing full-time. His first published novel was Burmese Days, which portrayed the hypocrisy and racism of the British ruling class in India. He followed this with several other novels and essays that explored various aspects of social and political life in Britain. However, it was his next novel that would bring him international fame and notoriety. 1984 was written during a period of great upheaval and uncertainty in Europe. The rise of fascism and Nazism had already plunged the continent into war, and there was growing fear and suspicion among the general public. Orwell was acutely aware of these dangers, and he believed that Britain was also at risk of falling under the sway of totalitarian ideologies. This concern was heightened by the increasing influence of Joseph Stalin and his regime in the Soviet Union, which had become a powerful ally of Britain during the war. But Stalin's purges and atrocities were becoming more apparent, and Orwell saw him as a threat to freedom and democracy everywhere. Orwell had already written a pamphlet in 1941 entitled The Road to Wigan Pier, which criticized the complacency and ignorance of the English intelligentsia and their failure to understand the plight of the working class. In 1943, he wrote an essay called Politics and the English Language, in which he lamented the decline of clear and accurate language in political discourse and the tendency to use euphemisms and doublespeak to conceal the truth or manipulate public opinion. All of these works reflected Orwell's growing sense of urgency and his determination to expose the evils of totalitarianism and the importance of safeguarding democracy and individual liberty. In 1945, Orwell began writing what would become his most famous work, 1984. The novel was published 4 years later to both critical acclaim and controversy. It tells the story of Winston Smith, a low-ranking member of the ruling party in Oceania, a superstate that is engaged in perpetual war with 2 other rival powers, Eurasia and Eastasia. Oceania is ruled by a charismatic but ruthless dictator known only as Big Brother, who uses a vast network of surveillance, propaganda, and terror to maintain absolute control over his subjects. Winston rebels against the party by engaging in a forbidden love affair, seeking out a clandestine organization called the Brotherhood, led by the enigmatic figure of Emmanuel Goldstein and trying to reconstruct a true version of history with the help of a mysterious woman named Julia. But he is ultimately captured, tortured and brainwashed by the party, and forced to betray Julia and embrace Big Brother's twisted version of reality. The novel is rich with vivid imagery, memorable characters, and profound insights into the nature of power, truth, and human resilience. It introduces us to concepts such as doublethink, thoughtcrime, newspeak, the Ministry of Truth, the thought police, and so on, which have since become part of our common lexicon. But what many readers may not realize is that these elements are not merely fictional creations, but rather reflections of real historical events and trends that Orwell was concerned about when he wrote the novel. For example, the rise of totalitarian regimes in the Soviet Union, Germany, and Italy inspired him to create a fictional dictatorship that used terror and propaganda to dominate its citizens. The increasing use of surveillance technology, such as closed-circuit television, microphones, and databases, prompted him to imagine a society where every move was monitored and recorded. The growing influence of mass media and the manipulation of language led him to develop a system of linguistic control called newspeak, which aimed to limit the range of thought and expression. And the rewriting of history and the falsification of evidence made him emphasize the importance of preserving the truth and challenging falsehoods. Now let's look at some of the more mystical interpretations of 1984 and its symbols. One of the most striking features of the novel is its setting in a dystopian future. Specifically, the year 1984, which was just a few years ahead of Orwell's own time when he wrote it. This temporal proximity serves to highlight the novel's message that the future is not predetermined, and that the choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow. By imagining a future in which everything seemed bleak and hopeless, Orwell was able to express his fears about the present and his hopes for the future. Another intriguing aspect of the novel is its protagonist, Winston Smith. His name itself is a pun on two words, win and ton, which suggests both victory and burden. This duality reflects Winston's character, who is both courageous and flawed, rebellious and conformist, hopeful and cynical. Winston represents the potential for good and evil in all of us and the constant struggle to choose between them. His journey from apathy to rebellion to defeat and finally to acceptance of his fate is a reminder of the power of love, hate, hope, and despair, joy and sorrow, truth and lies that shape our lives. One of the most iconic symbols in 1984 is Big Brother, the mysterious and omnipresent leader of the party. Big Brother is never seen or heard directly, but his presence is felt everywhere through his posters, his slogans, his spies, and his enforcers. Big Brother represents the ultimate evil in the novel, the personification of tyranny, totalitarianism, and the suppression of individual liberty. His image is often associated with surveillance, secrecy, and the denial of privacy. Another powerful symbol in 1984 is the telescreens, which are devices that serve multiple functions in Oceania. They are used for communication, entertainment, surveillance, and propaganda. Telescreens represent the invasion of privacy, the manipulation of information, and the blurring of boundaries between public and private life. They also symbolize the power of technology to control and manipulate human behavior. Finally, let's consider the rewriting of history and the falsification of evidence in 1984. This is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the novel, as it reveals the extent to which the party can distort reality and make people believe in falsehoods. The party changes facts, figures, events, and even languages to suit their purposes. They create a version of the past that suits their ideology, and that serves to justify their rule. This practice not only serves to maintain the party's power, but also to destroy the truth and to undermine the ability of individuals to think critically and to resist the party's control. So why does 1984 remain a timeless, cautionary tale? Why does it continue to resonate with readers from different generations and backgrounds? Why does it continue to be banned and challenged in some parts of the world? The answer lies in the universality of its themes and the timelessness of its warnings. 1984 reminds us that freedom is fragile, and that democracy is not a given, but something that needs to be defended and nurtured. It shows us that power corrupts, and that those who seek to wield power are often willing to use any means necessary to maintain it. It also reminds us that truth matters, and that those who seek to manipulate the truth are doing so at their own peril. And now we come to the main point of this video. How does 1984 apply to us today? What lessons can we learn from Orwell's novel for our own times? How can we avoid the fate of Oceania and its inhabitants? Well, first of all, we should recognize that we live in an age of digital surveillance and data collection. Every click, every search, every like or comment we make leaves a trace of our identity and behavior online. Our personal information is often shared without our knowledge or consent and used for profit or political gain. We should also note that we live in an age of media manipulation and fake news. The line between fact and fiction, between news and entertainment, is becoming increasingly blurred. We are bombarded with information from various sources, some of which may have hidden agendas or ulterior motives. Finally, we should acknowledge that we live in an age of loss of privacy and anonymity. The ability to remain anonymous or to keep things private is becoming increasingly rare. Our faces are recognized and our voices are recorded. Our actions are monitored and our movements are tracked. Of course, this is not to say that we are living in a society that is exactly like Oceania, but rather to point out that we are living in a society that shares some similarities with Oceania, and that we should be aware of the warning signs Orwell was trying to tell us. We should value our privacy and protect our personal information. We should be critical of the sources of our news and verify the information before sharing it. We should defend the freedom of the press and support independent journalism. We should also be aware of the language used to manipulate us and be careful not to fall prey to doublethink or newspeak. We should be vigilant against those who seek to abuse power and suppress dissent and be willing to stand up for what we believe in. By doing so, we can honor the legacy of George Orwell and his timeless masterpiece, 1984, and ensure that its message never fades away. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more content.